You know how hard it is to follow Chip? He does such great work. And I'm going to build on a little bit of what he said. Thanks, everyone, for having me here. I'm going to turn a little bit over to talking a little bit more about that experience and how we make it happen. I'm partnering with Maxie, who's going to talk after our break as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the power of emotion and business, and then Maxie's going to kind of bring some how those things happen. So let's get started. Why emotion? Why are we thinking about this? If you think about business today and we think about customer experience, everybody's talking about it, right? Our expectations as consumers have changed dramatically. And not only expectations as consumers, but also as employees, which I'm going to talk about a little bit too. But we see today that this ecosystem of how things operate, if you think about Uber recently partnered with Starbucks, right? You can now have Uber bring your Starbucks to you. We're seeing an ecosystem of brands working together. We're seeing an ecosystem of how brands work with their employees. And obviously, there's the customer and the brand relationship as well. So this larger ecosystem we talk about is all around how we behave as human beings and the emotions that we bring to those relationships. So we'll talk about some of that today, this morning. We want transactions, but what we really want as consumers, if you think about how you go about your day, we really want engaging experiences. Chip talked about a lot of examples of how we can go through our day-to-day and we want that consistent and we can get things done, but what we're really looking for is how we feel special as human beings, right? That's what he talked about. That's about how your agents interact. It's about how you walk into a store and talk to a checkout person. All of those interactions are really critical. So we're seeking that out. And what's happening is our expectations are increasing every day. We're looking for those interactions that provide those great memories, and I'll talk about how those all feed together. I want you to think about the last experience where you were wowed. So Chip gave you some great ideas and some exciting things that he's seen out in the market, but I want you to think of a specific example, and I want somebody to volunteer a story, if they would, about an experience where you were wowed. Who wants to volunteer? And don't make me voluntold. I'm really good at it. Yes. Can you? Yeah, thank you. Stand up.
So it's not the most recent, but one that I remember from probably 4 years ago. I traveled down to Santa Fe, New Mexico for business, and I walked into the hotel lobby and said, I need to go to dinner. And so I said, where do you recommend? She said, oh, you got to go to this restaurant over here. So I said, okay, great. So a colleague and I went to the restaurant, and we sat down, and I asked the waiter, I said, so this is our first time here. We're only going to be here one night. Only time I'm probably going to come to this restaurant, what should I order? And the server said, well, here's the thing on the menu that you should get, and you should do it like this, and oh, by the way, you need to put a fried egg on top. And I'm thinking, now this is the Mexican restaurant, and it was kind of a green chili inspired thing, but to put a fried egg on top didn't sound right to me, and I said, I don't know if that sounds right, but he's like, trust me. If you don't like it, I'll buy it and you can get something else. I said, okay, great. So we both ordered it. Best meal I've had in a Mexican restaurant in a long time. And to this day, I tell people, hey, if you ever go to Santa Fe, you need to go to this restaurant and you need to get this and you need to get a fried egg on it. And that experience for me was just something that I remembered. And now when I go into restaurants and I ask servers, what do you recommend? And they say, oh, everything on the menu is good. To me, they failed.
Yeah, so. Wasn't special, right? Yeah, that's great. So thank you for volunteering. So keep that memory in your mind, but I'm going to ask you, now think about a bad experience you've had with a brand. Okay, anybody want to share those? Usually everybody's like, yeah, I want to tell you my story. Who wants to share a bad example? There we are.
I probably won't need money. So, this is recent. I went in to get a tooth fixed, major dental company, and they fixed my tooth temporary. They come back on October 10th, right, which will give you your permanent. I went on October 10th to them. She says, we're closed today. I said, what do you mean you're closed? She says, no, all the doctors are off. It's a holiday. I said, I didn't schedule October 10th. You did. And I said, specifically, I said, now, I told you when we scheduled this, the 11th, I'm going to be in Austin, and I'm going to be away, so I can't get in there today. She says, there's nothing I can do. I said, really? She says, no, what do you want me to do? She says, the doctors aren't here. She literally, I left, and I tweeted, and I sent the letter to them via their, whatever, their survey thing. I get a response from their survey. that experience. We're very busy right now. It'll take 5 days to get responded to. So, needless to say, Jim Iam has been squeezed terribly about this unbelievable, massive dentist company to no avail, and it's getting shared all over the place. But it's amazing how they don't. It's the whole thing from Seinfeld about book at the appointment, the reservation. You ever seen that one? That's what I felt. I'm like, you did it, not me. But that was my recent one.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Whew. And you don't think we all don't have job security in this field, right? Can you hear the emotion? Okay, can you hear? He's actually physically getting shaken up like this. And for you, it made you feel special. You could hear in your voice, like, I tell people all the time, you can just hear the emotion coming out. So if you don't think emotion isn't important in business, it's how we as human beings make decisions. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happens today. So if you really think about customer experience, and I'm going to give you kind of a broader scope of what we consider customer experience, because a lot of people say, well, it's the contact center or it's the digital experience, right? It's everything. It's every interaction we have, whether it's looking at a billboard or walking into a store, calling the call center, interacting with an app, right? All of those things are touch points, and they all have and create impressions and memories for us, right? So it's all the perceptions we have with a brand, but it's also how we know and understand. Chip was talking about how do you know what your customers are after? That's part of getting their feedback and understanding where they are and understanding what they want to go do, but it's also those emotions that are tied to each of those interactions, even down to the micro interactions. Small things like if you're looking at an app and you can't find the button, right? Those things register in us. It's what we call neuroscience, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But it's really understanding how we engage that emotional side of our customer. Because we can all, if you think about coming to the hotel here, you probably had a great experience checking in. I've been delighted with everything here. But there's just foundational and functional things, getting in the taxi, coming here, checking out with the taxi, right? All those things that are just routine, nothing special. So how can we engage? Chip talked a lot about those ideas, and you're going to hear more from Maxie and several others today about how to do that. So I want to share with you the impact of that. If you think about everything that we do as a brand, how we price, how we hire, how we train our agents, how we build stores. Starbucks, for example, if you ever walk in a Starbucks, does anybody walk around that display to get to the register even though there's nobody in line? You know, we're human. We're wired a certain way. Everything that we do drives how people feel, right? So you heard the waiter give a great example. You heard, hey, they didn't quite figure out the logistics behind what was happening. That emotion is what drives our behavior. So if you think about your example you had about your good or bad experience, you probably were still feeling that emotion about that experience. And so when business owners and executives talk to us about, well, emotion, I don't understand how that's important. That's the soft and fuzzy stuff, right? No, that's how we as human beings make decisions, and we're driven by going back to places where we feel wonderful and avoiding places that we don't like to go, right? Very simple human basic behavior, which then drives business results. So if you think about the fact that you've told so many people about this restaurant, right? That's word of mouth. You can count the revenue from new customers coming because of what he's saying. And I bet you've told that story about your dental visit to several folks, and they ask you, well, where do you go? Because I don't want to go there, right? We see that impacting. So helping executives in your leadership to understand the importance of what's happening, make it relative to them. Have them tell you a story. It's a great way to get them talking and thinking and feeling about their emotions as consumers. I don't know why when we walk into our offices that we forget we as human beings are out there having experiences every day. And how we design those experiences to create certain emotions are absolutely impactful on our brand. Okay? By the way, you'll get these slides, so if you want to use those, any of these things, these are part of how we trained at AT&T, helping people to understand the importance of emotion in every interaction. So this would be kind of the link. Well, I'm just one person. How can I make an impact? I'm sure you've probably heard that from a lot of folks that you work with. Oh, I work in finance. I don't have an impact. Or I'm an app dev. I don't touch the customer, so why would I care? Every single decision we make as a brand, thinking about what customers expect and feel, just as we've discussed, it's driven by every single touch point interaction they have. So whether you're an app dev and you're building the app, or you're in finance and you're looking at how the invoice is structured, right, or how you're negotiating a contract, all of those single interactions, whether it's people or process or even communications, all add up to how those emotions take. So every single interaction we talked about, right, comes with an emotion and a memory. We're wired that way. So those feelings that we have about that interaction then accumulate. So over time, those become the relationship that we have. So think of it like a bank account, right? The more positive interactions you have with the brand, the more likely you are to stay, because you like to come back again where you feel comfortable and where you have a great experience and those wonderful emotions. Those relationships then over time build strong loyalty to the brand. And then again, back to the whole, this builds the business and customer value. So when we talk about each and every single interaction, the importance of those, it's kind of like I said, a bank account that you want to go there. So helping people understand where their impact is with each and every interaction and how they're designing it. The other thing that I want to talk about a little bit is I want you to think about, when you think about the experience that you have at work, how many of you are skipping to go to work every day, right? Happy, joyful, right? So not a lot of people in the audience, right? We really have to think about the fact that we're trading our life, our time and our effort to a brand and a company. We need to think about that relationship. So remember I talked about this ecosystem. We see a huge trend now in organizations looking at what's the experience like between the employee and the brand. Are we creating that exciting experience or that positive emotion with employees coming in? I'll give you an example. When we were at AT&T, scheduling a conference room was a nightmare. It was like, one, you couldn't find it. Two, it didn't, to keep your favorites of what floor you were on. We had an open working environment, so it was very difficult to find a place. So we looked at, gosh, I'm spending 20 minutes to do that every day. It's frustrating for me. That bleeds out into how I interact with my coworkers or how I'm interacting with customers, right? So fixing something internally made it easier. It was quick. It was easy. It notified you, hey, remember, this is where here's where it is. It showed a map. We redesigned the experience internally to avoid that frustration people having at work. And that's how we saw the experience and the engagement at work even increase. So also look at what your employees are after. We, as I said, trade our lives to interact with a brand and provide great feedback to the brand, so why wouldn't we build the same thing for them? I want to talk a little bit about the emotions in a journey. So I like this, you can totally steal this, by the way. I'd like to use this as an example of how we think about emotion over that brand, that interaction that we talk about. So imagine, if you will, that you were building a bridge, and everybody who was building a part of the bridge, the pylons, was a different person. And they were working off of a different blueprint, and they were hiring different workers, and they were buying different materials, and they were on different timelines. What do you think that bridge would look like? Kind of like this, right? Probably never get finished. It would be like that. The road would be this, right? That's exactly what happens when you build a customer experience in silos, right? The customer feels the fact that, now, any of you have silos in your organizations, right? Are you? We're really, really good at it. And they exist for a reason. Don't get me wrong. There should be business units have a purpose and they have a mission and goal. But the importance of working together is critical. And we'll talk about a little bit about how that plays on each other. One of the other trends that we're seeing is this huge movement forward in journey mapping. Have any of you done journey mapping? Know about the concept? If you don't, see me afterwards. I'll send you some information, but there's some great links to go. It's just a technique that we use to look at how the customer is interacting with your company from their perspective. And we look at all the things that they're touching and feeling, but we also look at all the things that what we call backstage. What's contributing to that experience and how to do that? And we look at it end to end. So taking the customer's perspective allows you to take a look at your organization, looking across the silos and how everything has to come together to make sure that journey is emotionally engaging and functionally engaging. So think about journey mapping. And when we've talked about journey mapping, we do this sometimes with customers, but always with a cross-functional team in an organization. And many people will kind of look at that journey and say, okay, as the customer's going through this journey with us, whether they're going onto our website and looking, or they're calling our call center for information, or they're walking into a store, we're looking at their needs and wants, right? If you think about how would you want somebody to design an experience for you, that's what we do when we look at journey mapping and customer experience. We design around what the customer needs and wants. We also can look at what the emotions we're creating, right? So if you go in and test out, like Chip said, go and call your call center. What's that experience like? What's the emotion that you're invoking when somebody calls the call center? What are they walking away with? Because that gets, again, hardwired into how we feel and then how we think and behave. We can also look at it from what are the expectations. So when I walk into this hotel, right, I expect to walk up to the front desk and somebody's going to give me the key and I go up to my room. but she gave me a card for, here's, free trigger for the bar, mini bar in my room, right? She said, do you need a ride tomorrow? When are you leaving? Would you like for me to schedule anything for you? Is there anything you want to visit while you're here in Austin, right? Asking me all these questions. It's like, wow, she's really thinking about the experience I'm going to have. That's designed around how she wants me to feel about the grid. So take a look at journey mapping if you haven't done it. It's a great way to really get in your customer's shoes and understand the experience they're going through and what emotions you're creating. And we think about a little bit about the functional and emotional. I've talked a little bit about that. But I want to share with you, if you really think about the things that your organization is doing, a lot of times we find organizations really focused on how do I define and meet those functional needs, kind of those moment needs we call them. So the basics, if you think about the Maslow's hierarchy, right? Food, shelter, water, all the things that we think about. But the higher you go in that hierarchy, the more you're meeting emotional needs. And so I'm a clinical psychologist by trade, so thinking about Maslow's hierarchy comes naturally, but just sharing with folks, if they think about their own life and what they're really trying to do, we want a sense of accomplishment. We want a sense of being taken care of and avoiding it. So the higher up you can move people on that emotional realm, the better, the more engaging your emotions will be. And let me give you an example of that. The brands that we find are being very successful today are focused on meeting both functional and emotional needs. So the functional needs are things like I have to get from point A to point B. It's the how. It's the how you feel, how easy it is, effortless, as Chip is referring to. Here's an example. In a moment need, it's kind of the task I'm trying to complete. So I went with my daughter to visit colleges, and I needed to take a bunch of things with me. So I said, I need these things with me all the time. We had the college catalogs. We had her schedules of her interviews she was going on. I needed a shoulder bag so my hands were free because we're going to be walking. And, of course, I'm looking at my phone the whole time. And I need to get inside my bag quickly because we were kind of on the run the whole time. I think a cotton canvas tote would work for me, right? $5.98, pretty inexpensive. That really fills my functional need, but probably not my emotional need. So if you think about it, when we think about emotional needs on the other side, I need my friends to look at me for fashion advice. I want something beautiful with me, and I need a bag that shows I'm in and successful. Now, these are the things that go on in the back of our head, right? They're subconscious, which we're going to talk about in a second. What do you think? Look at the price difference here. Does that bag, the first bag, fulfills all the needs, right? But it certainly doesn't fulfill my emotional needs. That's why we're willing to pay more, as Chip talked about and Maxie's going to talk about as well. We're willing to pay more to do business with a brand that fulfills our emotional need. He gave the example of the coffee. Same example. So helping people to understand fulfilling the functional need, I resolved your issue, doesn't necessarily mean when they hung up the phone that they enjoyed doing that or they walked away with a positive experience. So I want you to think about that as we talk a little bit about metrics and measures here in a second. In case you hadn't thought about it, really that functional need, it's really rational, right? But it's those subconscious, that voice in our head and the emotion that comes with it. As a matter of fact, we find that human beings overall, it's about 15% that's really rational and conscious, and we make decisions 85% of the time on our subconscious and our emotion. That's just how human beings are wired. I'll give you an example. If you think about it, if I were to ask you, what's your favorite place to shop? Everybody got a brand, right? Somebody tell me their favorite place to shop.
Amazon.
Okay, why do you go to Amazon?
It's easy. I don't have to leave my house. It's like everything that I ever want.
That's wonderful. Wow, that's pretty easy. So when you think about that, it's like functional. Usually when I ask people, like, tell me a retail store, like my husband always says, I love to go to Home Depot, right? Okay, there's a big surprise, right? So he's going there because he needs to find something to build the house, right? Like you said, you go to Amazon because it's easy and all that. But when I start to really tease out and think about your favorite thing, other than location, what's really the reason you go there? Well, the parking lots are clean. I love the fact that somebody greets me. I love that I can be walking around the store and somebody comes up, and if I ask about something, they're very informed and knowledgeable. They come and show me where it is. They give me tips and tricks that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. They even save me money. So when I really dig into what's the real reason you go there, it's usually these things that we don't say out loud. So it's a good technique to start to use with your customers when you're thinking about their experience and really saying, what's the subconscious that's going on? What's that thing above their head? If I really drilled into why they're doing and what they're after, how do you do that? So one technique that we actually trained our care center reps and our retail reps to do is really to begin to think about what that message is in their head and what they might be feeling and thinking subconsciously. Let me give you an example. Anybody been in a hotel where you've had this type of hanger? Do you know what this type of hanger is? Okay. So it's functional, right? Back to the whole function thing. What's the subconscious message behind this? You're going to steal my hangers, right? See, you said it, but you probably didn't say that out loud, but you thought it. And we accumulate those things in our minds, and we attach them to that brand. So whenever you see one of these, you're going to go, oh, yeah, this one, now I get it. That's the thing that we're sending. So somebody's making a decision about we're going to save some money operationally. We're going to give the customer what they need functionally, but the message they're sending unintentionally is, we don't trust you. I've even been in hotels where they've have the wine opener actually bolted down to the desk, right? Come on, guys, it's a $1 hanger. It's a trade-off. It's a trade-off. It's an impact to your brand. Maxie's going to talk a little bit about personality and emotion, and any of you who are doing business and Mattersight, this is critically important, and I want to kind of separate those two things just so you understand kind of when you talk about it. We think of personality think about that as the ecosystem and the climate, right? And emotion is what you're having at a certain period of time. Our very enjoyable story here about the dentist office, you could actually see that emotion. So most normally, I would assume you're pretty even-keeled, right? Normally, but we see those times when we're really having an emotion. So separating personality types, but also thinking about that emotion. We're also seeing a huge increase in psychologics and neuroscience. You've heard me talk about the fact that a lot of these subconscious things get registered in our brain. My husband calls it his lizard brain, right? Things that were just programmed as human beings that we take in and look for patterns. Chip gave a great example of how we look for patterns and how we're hardwired. We're looking at how can we disrupt and interrupt what's happening and how we connect with people on that level so that we get the importance of what that emotion is. We're also seeing a focus on different outcomes. So we talk a lot about if you looked at your KPIs for your executives, I would bet you wouldn't see anything on there that probably related anything to what the customer is experiencing when it comes to emotions. So we're seeing things like, you're hearing more now about transparency and integrity and fairness and trust. We're looking at outcomes differently in customer experience now, and I'm going to give you some examples of how that's coming to bear. If I see one more chart and graph, to be honest with you, I'll scream. I've been doing this a long time, and it's like you look at those numbers, and they don't really tell you the story behind it. You can say, oh, we had a Net Promoter Score increase of 1 point. We actually taught storytelling as one of the techniques to our executives and folks even on the front line because it really helps you to bring that story to life. We would bring customers in and talk about their experiences and show them the results of that. And we started to tie the connection between what customers were saying and feeling and how that was impacting the business. Remember, what they feel, how they behave, how it drives business results. So it's a great way to bring that voice into what you're doing with your executives so they can begin to understand the impact of creating these great experiences and designing around that emotion and providing great emotional experiences. We as consumers want different things that we wanted. Yes, I want my issue resolved, but yes, I also want to hang up the phone and feel secure or happy or satisfied, whatever those emotions are. If you take a look at some of these things, we would say, I would love to have these things be consistent. I want it to be seamless. Remember the bridge picture, right? You go somewhere and you go online and you're looking at content, you call the care center and they tell you something different. That creates that interaction in our brain. It kind of says, wait a second, that's not right. We're looking for those patterns again, as Chip talked about. We also want things to be personalized. We want to be recognized. That creates that emotion that I have, a friend when somebody uses your name. So think about your measures and metrics differently. If I were to ask you, how are you really measuring that emotional experience that your organizations or your customers are having with your organization, what would you tell me? So I'm just teasing out a little bit. We're starting to think about how we measure those things a little bit differently. And really trying to see how they also accumulate. So the reason I brought up journey mapping is it's not just that one thing. If we have a bad experience with a brand, it carries forward. A matter of fact, it takes about 13 positive experiences to overcome one negative one. And those emotions also accumulate in different ways. So we often say frustration can lead to anger, can lead to disappointment. So what I've shown you here is if you think about that surprise that Chip was giving us great examples on, surprise often leads to this happiness, which leads to gratitude, which means your customers are going to behave differently and tell others, right? So we see this accumulating. But negative experiences also accumulate. So the more experiences they have, we call it upstream, right? Seeing your advertisement, walking into the store, all accumulate. And so negative experiences can accumulate as well. And that's where we see this mistrust of customers and loyalty start to decline. So think about it as that bank account I talked about earlier. And the more positive experiences you have, the more loyalty you're going to have for customers, and really looking at those experiences. We're also seeing a huge increase in, these are kind of those KPIs that we talk about. So in addition to Net Promoter Score, which kind of tells you, if you think about it, it's kind of an egocentric ask, right? Are you willing to recommend us? What about how easy was it for you to complete the task you were trying to complete? Or did you feel like the rep really understood your opportunity or your issue? We're seeing a personalization index where how personal are we? Is it that creepy factor, or are we really engaging people? And how are we engaging them? How personalized are we? Is it smart? Is it educational, as Chip gave us the example? And then we're seeing a trust index come up. How much does the consumer really trust the brand? So these are some ways that we're starting to see emotion kind of creep into scorecards and measures and metrics for organizations. And one thing I'll talk about here, I'll give you some examples. This guy's kind of successful, you know, if you've seen him out. He's got a few brands but if you look at his brands, it's very consistent. But I love his quote about it's feelings and feelings alone that really account for Virgin brand in all its forms. Every time you see the Virgin brand, you know the type of experience you're going to have. He's really created that part. But it's not by accident. He provides real-time feedback and mobile chat between his employees and his customers. So he's keeping that customer voice and those emotions in front of his employees all the time, so they remember that they're creating those happy memories. Associates know almost in real time what customers think and feel about flights or their interactions. So by the time you get off and you get that, hey, how was your flight, or where are you, right? That gets fed immediately back to the crew that was on the flight. So they know exactly what happened and when, and they can immediately respond to it. It's not a month later we get Net Promoter Scores. We have to do that to kind of benchmark and kind of see where we are, but it's really bringing that down to every single interaction and how we bring that together. And then they have a fluid insights group, and this is really employee and customers working together. So remember the journey mapping? We've actually done that with customers and said, what is that really like? You know, what did you feel during that? And what were some of the things that stood in your way? And how could we help you more through that interaction? So this is a guy who's really walking the walk. Net emotional value. So United tested this out. This was actually, how did you feel about the service and why? So it's not how likely are you to recommend, but how did we make you feel? And they actually give you the opportunity to just kind of circle how you felt on that flight. So they're starting to then track, do we think customers are feeling cared for? Do they feel safe? Which is kind of important when you fly, right? Kind of feel safe. Were you dissatisfied? Were you irritated, stressed, unhappy? What's the range of that emotion as well? Not just was it great or not, it's what exactly are you feeling? So they can track that and begin to manage against it. And then also, if you've ever been in a Mac, have a Mac, or you've been in an Apple store, you've probably had a lot of interactions with their Genius Bar. But this is part of how this organization trained their for interactions, is they kind of talk about this feel, felt, and found. So the customer might say, this Mac is just too expensive. And so you'll see there that the Genius says, I can see how you'd feel that way. I felt the price was a little high, and I found it's a great value. So immediately they're building empathy, talking about the emotion, recognizing that emotion. That makes us feel good, right? How are you feeling today? Great. Really? Because you look a little worried. Some of those things really helping people to understand how they're feeling and beginning to talk about it is actually engaging itself. It kind of opens our hearts a little bit to what's happening. So they've built ways, very simple ways, to begin to understand and build that empathy and how they interact with customers and how it can help their brand and them be successful. So I would challenge all of you to really go out and discover the emotions in your journey. If you're looking at interactions in your care center, if you're looking at watching people when they walk into a store, go out and observe and really look for what those emotions are that you're creating. And then what are the emotions you want to create? And think about how you're going to be creating those. And we'll give you some examples. Max is going to give you some examples of how companies have done that. And really think about this as a way to build both this structure of what needs to get done, this functional, but also how you're adding heart to your organization.